As chair of the Holberg board, it is my great privilege to welcome you to this conversation between Bjørn Enge Bertelsen, academic director of the Holberg Prize and professor of anthropology at the University of Bergen, and the 2024 Holberg Laureate, Professor Achille Mbembe, who will be properly introduced in just a minute. But please allow me first a few words in promotion of the Holberg Prize. The portfolio of the Holberg Prize consists of four major components. First, the main Holberg Prize, which is awarded to excellent scholars in the disciplines of the humanities, social sciences, law, and theology. Second, the Niels Klim Prize, awarded to a young researcher being from or working in Nordic countries. For the Holberg and the Niels Klim Prizes of next year, we strongly encourage nominations to be submitted through the website of the Holberg Prize until the deadline of 15th of June, 1 week. So please check out our website for further information. In addition to these two prizes, we also run the Holberg Prize School Project, which is a research competition for students in the upper secondary schools in Norway. Finally, the Holberg Prize organizes the Holberg Debate, an annual event in December inspired by Ludvig Holberg's intellectual curiosity and legacy, aiming to explore pressing issues of our time. Today's event marks the end of the Holberg Week, which has been a string of seminars, lectures, and celebrations held in Bergen in the past few days in honor of our Holberg Laureate and our Niels Klim Laureate, Siddharth Sarin. It has been a great pleasure and indeed a great privilege to spend these days in the company of our esteemed, our amazing Holberg Laureate, Achille Mbembe. So thank you, Achille, for all that you have offered during this excruciating week, I must say. So now I'm looking very much forward to to see you walk this final mile of this academic marathon here in Norway. And without further ado, I will hand the word over to Bjørn. Please, Bjørn.
Thank you very much, Jørgen. Thank you for that. Yes, it's been a long week, but I think, and I hope, and I believe we still have some energy left, Achille, at least you. Welcome, everyone, to this event here in Oslo. I have the great honor of talking to Achille Mbembe here tonight, but I will also open the floor to a Q&A session because I suspect there are people here who might have questions, queries, and comments to your thought and to your scholarship and to the subject of tonight. But before that, allow me to introduce Achille Mbembe to you. I mean, perhaps you don't need an introduction, but I will give it to you anyway to refresh your memory about who this laureate this year is. Achille Mbembe is currently research professor of history and politics at the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research, otherwise known as WISER, at the University of the Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, South Africa. He's also director of the Innovation Foundation for Democracy. This is something he might also come back to in our discussion tonight, or perhaps not. In recommending Professor Mbembe for the Holberg Prize, the Holberg Committee notes that he is recognized as one of the foremost thinkers of post-colonial Africa and a leading critical theorist of the planetary. Further, he has significantly advanced the understanding of racism and its effects on subjectivity, particularly through the concept of the racial subject. Mbembe's rejection of all forms of racism is also inspired by the uneven impact of the climate crisis on the global south. This is a theme he has explored in his recent work, or one of his most recent works, Brutalism, which came out in English in 2024, and of which there is one copy left, or there was one copy left at the bookshop earlier tonight. Perhaps relevant for our talk here tonight, the committee further emphasizes the importance of Mbembe's groundbreaking work, Critique of Black Reason, which came out in English in 2017. This is a philosophical study of the historical emergence and meaning of blackness. It examines how the term black was used to dehumanize individuals in the interests of capital, showing how blackness was associated with being non-human or animal-like, thereby justifying the reproduction of oppressive and exploitative structures. Mbembe argues also that some black critiques of race have implicitly reproduced the epistemology of racial difference. Recently, Achille's work has shifted to contemporary developments in the colonial imperial world, including the nature of late Eurocentrism, the impact of the Anthropocene, and the implications of artificial intelligence for humanity. The committee concludes that Mbembe's oeuvre, his work, goes beyond the particularized notion of decolonization to a universalist recentering of the human. And recentering here, I think, is a key word. This involves, for Achille, a commitment to facing historical truth and fostering and learning across south-north divides. So please join me again in welcoming Achille Mbembe here to Oslo. So I thought, Achille, before moving into the theme of tonight, and we will move into the theme of tonight in different ways, we could start a bit with you presenting yourself in your own words. And let me just cite from an interview you did in 2019 with a journal called Chilperic, where you distanced yourself from being called both a post-colonial and a decolonial scholar. And you called yourself, and apologies also to the French ambassador in the room for my French, but a penseur de la traverse, or a thinker of the crossroads. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that and why you wanted to distance yourself from these two very sort of broad categories?
Okay. First of all, I'm very happy to be here. I was here a number of years ago for a series of lectures, and it's a pleasure to come back to this house. So thank you very much, Bjørn. Yes, I have had a hard time letting critics, let's say, bringing them to understand that I am not at all a post-colonial theorist. Mm-hmm. That has never, in fact, been my my project. Even less so, I do not define myself as a decolonial theorist, neither. What I have tried to do, especially at the beginning of my work, was to take seriously the fact of our living in the aftermath of colonialism. Mm-hmm. And I was referring not only to a historical period after colonialism, I was trying to diagnose what we could call a condition, mm-hmm. Exactly in the same way in which an author such as Frantz Fanon put a lot of effort in his auscultation of the colonial condition. And I invented, for that matter, the notion of post-colony, which is itself the title of a book written first of all in French and then translated into English in 2001. So it seems to me that, I mean, one has to be, to put it mildly, a reckless reader to, no, seriously, I mean, to move from post-colony, glide over a term which in any case doesn't exist in French. It didn't exist until then, nor did it exist in English. To do as if it didn't mean anything, and then to put on my back the etiquette post-colonial doesn't make any sense at all. So I'm not at all against post-colonial studies, but that's not the object of my interrogation. Post-colonial studies, for those who have followed this trend, this intellectual trend, was born, if you want, in the West, basically. It's a pure product of Western intellectual thought. Foucault, through his conversation with Said, Gayatri Spivak, Homi Bhabha, and a whole bunch of critiques, most of whom were coming from the literary field, who are reflecting precisely on that which happened or happens at the interface of, let's say, the colonized and the colonizer, and who were interested in mapping the traces, the legacies of that encounter up into the present. That's not what I'm doing in the book on the post-colony. But once again, it doesn't mean that I'm against post-colonial studies, because in France, for instance, there's a strong resistance against post-colonial studies. In places such as Germany, because of the specific nature of this country, which, I mean, we should never forget, has committed 2 genocides in 1 century, there are forces, political conservative forces, which aim at depicting post-colonial studies as but an avatar, a poor avatar of anti-Semitism, which doesn't make any sense at all. So when I say I'm not a post-colonial scholar, it's not to, let's say, stigmatize the project. It's just that that's not what I do. Now, when it comes to the decolonial gesture, I'm not decolonial in the sense, for instance, of Walter Mignolo. That's not really my thing. I respect Walter very, very much. I think that today we are able to say a number of things thanks to the work he has done. Himself and those scholars who profess to posit themselves within that realm. I am very suspicious of difference. I'm suspicious of difference because, I mean, my project is really not about either glorifying difference or, for that matter, erecting it into a kind of essence which we use in order to posit ourselves either against others or be read in relation to an other. My work is about the in common, if you want, which is very different from universalism, especially universalism, Madame l'ambassadrice, à la française, which once in a while, let's say, presents itself precisely from above in a kind of universalism de surplomb, as Merleau-Ponty himself, let's say, criticized it.
Could you elaborate on what that means for those of us who have forgotten our Merleau-Ponty?
Yes, it means basically Merleau-Ponty. So it means a kind of universalism de surplomb, in the sense that you place yourself at the center. I mean, you just say, okay, I'm the center. And everything else has to be read in relation to me. And in fact, I am the authority which determines anything that gravitates around me. I define who is whom, who is what, how people should behave, what they should think, and I basically erect my own provincialism into universalism. That kind of gesture, which is somewhat a gesture of bad faith, if you want. So my project is not that. What I tried to do over the last 3 decades and a half is an attempt at reflecting on really 3 key questions, all articulated around the drama of the future. Future of life, the future of reason, and the future of the earth, but from a very specific position, Africa. I'm not saying continental Africa. I'm saying Africa in its multiple centers and its capacity for diffraction, in the sense that Africa is all over the world. There's not one single corner of the world where Africa is not present. So that's the Africa I have in mind. So how is it that we read these 3 key dramas of our age, starting from that specific place which is in motion, which has been very often discarded, which are called, as I was trying to explain in Bergen, using words from the Psalm, that stone that has been discarded by the builders. So what happens when you bring back, you make of that stone that has been discarded by the builders, you make of it the cornerstone in the common effort to build something new. What happens? That's what I have been doing. And it's not neither post-colonial nor decolonial, it's something else.
So this is what you mean by the in common, then, in a sense.
Yes.
An in common that doesn't rely on a Western-centric notion or understanding of universalism, in a sense. It's another form of commonality, an emergent form of commonality for humanity, in a sense.
Neither Western-centric nor Afrocentric.
No, because this latter point is important to you, I guess. Yeah, this Afrocentric with a capital A and a very hard border, because that would again go back to something you critique, which is the essence, the essence kind of thinking.
Yes.
Yes.
That's how I would define it.
Okay, so now we've started to get to know you a bit, I think. I hope. But before we talk more about you specifically, and there are things we might return to, like the notion or the tragedy or the tragic history of the nation state, and also the notion of the future. You've suggested the title tonight of Apartheid After South Africa. And I read this, and I think, I would suspect some in the audience also read this as you signaling that the notion of apartheid as a form of governance and a policy of enclosure did not end with the formal abolishment of apartheid in 1990, 1994, depending on how you think of it, and instead has become global in a sense. And I would like to quote you here on what you've said about apartheid. Apartheid, in your definition, meant that, and I quote from the Critique of Black Reason book, one of your brilliant books in my view, I quote, "The state leveraged race in a generalized social struggle meant to infuse the entire social body and to sustain a particular relationship to rights and the law." So, if we have this understanding of yours of apartheid as a starting point, could you, and this might be a naive question, could you elaborate for us, in your view, what was apartheid in South Africa? And in what sense can you say, if you agree, that it's become a global condition, or at least a global potential that is somewhere being realized, in a sense? It's a big question, but I mean, approach it any way you like.
Okay, it's a big question. Let me start from, let's say I will try to approach it in a perspectival manner, meaning, okay, I stand here, I look at it, and then I move, I go on the other side, and I look at it and all that. Let me just start with Hannah Arendt. Why Hannah Arendt? Because Hannah Arendt, in a very important book she wrote, which is called Origins of Totalitarianism, devoted an entire chapter to South Africa. And it's chapter 2. It is called Race and Bureaucracy. It is a chapter that has not, at least in my knowledge, been the object of any proper study or analysis. And yet I believe that it is a very important contribution to the proper understanding, in any case, philosophical understanding of what colonialism has been all about. It is a chapter that is specifically devoted to the form of colonialism that ended up prevailing in South Africa, and which later on, from 1948 on, took the form of, let's just call it a racial state, a state built on racism, on the legislation of racism, on a constitutional act, the result of which obliged any inhabitant of that country to be racist, where to be non-racist was a crime. So part of what Hannah Arendt shows, building in fact on historical work done by early South African liberal historians, in this case in particular de Kivit, what she shows is that inherent in any colonial project is a genocidal impulse. That in fact, colonialism is propelled both in its unconscious and, in a number of cases, in its execution. It is premised on the drive for eradication and extermination. And then she goes on to show that these impulse, this genocidal exterminatory impulse, of course has been translated in actuality in a number of historical cases. She then examines, for instance, the case of Native Americans in America, the case of the Aborigines in Australia, and then she focuses on the South African case in order to show why it is that this exterminatory genocidal impulse did not materialize in this specific case. And she tries to explain it historically by arguing that, in fact, the specificity of South Africa was that, to put it simply, the interdependency between blacks and whites was such that had whites attempted to exterminate blacks, they would have committed suicide. They wouldn't have been able to survive. And then she elaborates on that interdependency, asymmetrical of course, which led therefore to the establishment in South Africa of a form of disjunctive inclusion whereby blacks became indispensable and at the same time expendable. So far so that apartheid, in her mind, is this dialectics of indispensability and expendability, which prevented South Africa from falling into the pure genocidal course. Colonialism took, settler colonialism took in a number of other places. So that's a long explanation, as you can see, but you are the one who posed the question.
Yeah, I hope I wasn't the only one wondering what you meant by apartheid. No.
So let's say from an Arendtian point of view, that's what apartheid is. Disjunctive inclusion on the basis of the dialectics of expendability and indispensability, all of which opens up to a form of biopolitics in which black life is valued, but in the realm of the market, because you need them to clean your house, take care of your kids, to walk your dog, to go inside the mines, contract silicosis, die younger, etc., etc., and be paid almost nothing. But be paid something which is different from what Du Bois describes in Black Reconstruction, the very first pages, where he makes a distinction between the slave and a laborer, a worker. The fact that a worker, you are paid a stipend, a slave, you are paid nothing. And yet both, you are put to work, used as a source of energy, muscular energy, and so forth and so on. So now I'm getting lost in my own explanation. So that's what she has in mind. So you value black life, the black body, to use a term many use these days, because of its instrumentality in the market sphere. Instrumentality within the plantation paradigm, you need them to clear the marshes, the forest, produce cotton, all of those things. Instrumentality in the realm of production, I mentioned the mining complex in South Africa. And yet at the same time, they are subjected to a constant process of devaluation, this black life, in the realm of bigotry, if you want, which means racism. So how do you hold on to this? What type of political system you create is indeed the purpose. But fundamental to apartheid is therefore the racial, in the sense I have just defined it, the capacity to hold on to, let's say, to keep a leash on the genocidal dimension typical of colonialism. You keep that genocidal impulse on a leash. You don't, let's say, unleash it, or if you do, you unleash it in a molecular, metabolic form, slow doses. You don't kill once on a go, although, of course, they are massacres, small massacres, but it's not a total unleashing of exterminatory forces. So I believe, in order to answer your question, that the abolition of apartheid in South Africa was partial.
Yes.
Was partial abolition when we look into it properly. Second, that this partial abolition of apartheid in South Africa didn't result in the, let's say, the death of the project of apartheid globally. And that, in fact, part of what we have witnessed is that the project of separation, which is also part of the apartheid project, the capacity to kill people in small doses, those killing projects which are not necessarily exterminatory, but exposing them to premature death, suffocating them and depriving them of oxygen, to the point where the last words they have to utter just before their death is, "I can't breathe." Those processes are still with us. And they have been refined, and they have metabolized, and they have been undergoing deep process of sedimentation and multiple forms of redistribution, to the point where the ways in which apartheid used to treat only black people, those ways are now amenable to being applied to more than blacks themselves. Therefore, the becoming black, let's say, of the world. But look, I'll stop there because we can have devote the whole evening just to this issue.
Yes, and luckily we do devote the whole evening to these issues. so I'm very happy for that. But I'm just curious, because when you talk of apartheid, apartheid was a I mean, in your mind, it's of course a historical phenomena. I mean, back to 1948, formal abolishment, and then you make the argument, and I would agree with you, that it's only partially been dismantled in a sense, and we can come back to that and also talk about the reasons for it. But I'm curious about the connection you also make to global capitalism, in a sense. Would you say that apartheid was a kind of an actualization or an extreme case of a kind of latent apartheid that was there all along as a global condition under capitalism, colonialism, etc., or was apartheid a form of really an exception to the rest of the global condition when it was in operation? I mean, where would you locate, you know, what we sometimes think of as the extreme case of South Africa in relation to the rest of the world, in a sense?
Let's say that they were crazy enough to legislate it.
Okay.
I think that's where probably the South African so-called exceptionalism in this case, that's where it relies. They were crazy enough to proclaim it in the face of the world, constitutionalize it, put it in writing in the law. Of course, one can say, yes, in the US, for instance, until the civil rights movement, this was also more or less put in writing. But from 1948 onwards, in fact, South Africa is the only racist state on earth which assumes its identity as such. So when Michel Foucault, for instance, writes in Society Must Be Defended, the chapter before the last, when he sums up his developments on the concept of biopolitics, he refers to Nazi Germany, which he presents as the model of the racist state. When he's writing, Nazi Germany doesn't exist any longer. He's writing in the early mid-70s. The only really existing racial state, when he writes and sums up his argument about biopolitics, is South Africa. But as it happens, we know how it works. Of course, it doesn't deal with that, which doesn't invalidate entirely his argument. I'm just saying that, look, I mean, maybe it would have been a bit more powerful to talk about also actually existing forms of. So
I would agree.
I think that they have been in various forms of capitalism. We can periodize them. Earlier forms of capitalism during the regime of the plantations, slave plantation, primitive forms of accumulation during the colonial wars of conquest and dispossession in places such as the eastern frontier in southern Africa, the kind of predatory forms of capitalism, for instance, in the Congo during King Leopold, or maybe for that matter, but it's up to you to tell us because that's your field, what happened in Mozambique too, with this whole system of capitations where sovereignty is not extended to an entire territory, where sovereignty does not really, is not completed in the sense that you have total control over people, or over borders and space, where sovereignty is in fact very fragmented, dispersed, multiple forms of control competing with each other, not only Western forms, but Asians, internal indigenous forms. So we have a whole variety of configurations. But it will take too long to go through them. So let's just say that, yes, what happens with South Africa is that its ruling class, its ruling racial class, is crazy enough to write down what should maybe remain unsaid and yet practiced.
I think that's a very good reply to the question. But can we move into the kind of the tricky and somewhat painful, I might add, terrain of just the argument about the partial dismantling of apartheid in South Africa? I mean, it's For those of us who witnessed from afar 1990, 1994, the kind of hope imbued in South Africa, the beauty of its first constitution. Now we've had, there are a few decades that have passed since then, and you say that the apartheid has only been partially dismantled or done away with. Can you tell us why you come to that kind of conclusion in light of what has passed?
Okay, I have to qualify that conclusion, although I hold on to it.
I'm not sure you agree with the assessment, but
look, there is a discussion going on in South Africa, part of which is generational. The younger generations, especially among the black intelligentsia, black South African intelligentsia, most of them do believe that not much has changed. Some even believe that nothing has changed. They argue that nothing has changed because the foundational violence, which started with the conquest and occupation of the country today known as South Africa, which happened with arrival on those shores of Jan van Riebeeck, that this original sin has not at all been expiated, to use that language. That in fact, what should have happened in 1994 and would have been a clear-cut manifestation of the rupture, radical rupture that was needed, all of that should have been written in a politics of expiation. They don't use that term, but as I'm thinking, I think that's the correct term they probably have in mind. A politics of expiation and counter-eradication, because you have an original eradication, and you counter it with a different form of eradication, and as opposed to the so-called politics of reconciliation, rainbowism, and the rainbow nation. They call it the kumbaya type of, I mean, you dance the tango, basically. And what we did in South Africa in 1994, with Desmond Tutu, okay, we all dance in the tango. Rather than engaging in these real politics of eradication or counter-eradication, which would somewhat have been a mimicry, if you want, of what happened before. It seems to me that something happened in South Africa in those years, in 1994, which is not happening in many other parts of the world, where politics today is really about identifying an enemy and eradicating the enemy at all costs, including at the cost of committing one's own suicide in the process. The suicidal politics of vengeance. it seems to me that what happened in South Africa, which is foundational, which is fundamental, about which we haven't thought deeply enough, was an attempt at interrupting that logic. The word in French is la loi du talion. La loi du talion is an Old Testament kind of law, an imperative. If we are fighting and you take one eye of mine, I will try to take 2 eyes of yours, not just one. You cripple one leg of mine, I will cut 2 of your own legs. That's la loi du talion. Dent pour dent, tooth for tooth. I think one tooth, two teeth for one, I would say. That is what, in the South African experience, they tried to interrupt. Interrupt it in order to open up a space for really a new beginning, for a process, the Greeks call it metanoia. Metanoia means a kind of conversion, inner conversion, inner turning into somebody else. But somebody else who, because he or she has been able to operate this turn into oneself, has ended up acquiring aspects of the other's face. So far so that he or she, when he or she looks at your face, he recognizes parts of his or her own face. This is what we see, this metanoia, this call for metanoia. We see it, for instance, in the work of Mandela, Conversations with Myself. When he is in prison, at the height of repression, when he has to face himself and realize that if you are really looking for deep transformation, it has to begin with these kind of, sorry, words don't come in English, assays, I don't know how you call it, kind of self-purification most revolutionaries have undergone. When you read Gandhi, it's exactly the same thing. You read Sisulu, it's exactly the same thing. The kind of confrontation with the abyss and a capacity to face it with one's own eyes and to confront it and to emerge on the other side of the real as an entirely different person. So that's what we see also when we read Tutu, who has been laughed at for his supposedly facile sentimentalism, which it wasn't. But we haven't done that work. So we dismiss all of that. We perform radicalism and we perform purity as if performance alone was enough. So I don't recall what the question was.
The question
but
was...
you have I guess that's what happens the last day of the Holberg.
I've gotten multiple replies. The question we've all forgotten. But I think this is very important, the pointing out of also the, by now, quite easy critique made against sort of what happened in 1990, 1994, because yes, and also I mean it's very easy also to forget how
metanoia never happened
no.
for all. That's why it wasn't abolished entirely.
Yes, I think that's
we
true.
fell short of that project of self-deep transformation.
Yes,
and we were all satisfied with the facade. On both sides.
We will very soon open the question for the audience as well. So if you have a question, prepare it in your mind, short. But before that, I mean, there's just been an election in South Africa now. And we had an informal conversation the other day, and now with the ANC's perhaps grip on power having to be shared, or perhaps being morphed into something else, ANC's hold of governance to become something else. Do you think we might approach or become closer to a kind of a post-apartheid moment now? Is there anything you immediately see in the election results that would indicate that we're moving in a different direction in South Africa?
I mean, Sarah has a way of, I wasn't born in South. It's not that you need to be born somewhere to say something plausible about the place. But I guess when you have been born in a place, you know things others don't know. But she has this way of telling me that South Africa always defeats any kind of prediction. That, in fact, it's a place you predict a racial war, it never happens. Everything you predict never happens. Or when it happens, it's never in the form it was predicted. So I accept that. I think we have to, anything we say has to be based on that. That we allow to be contradicted by events and history. That having been said, I believe that there is still a long way to go. There's still a long way to go for new forces, political, intellectual, and cultural forces to emerge from the current contradictions and to offer a real alternative to South Africa. What would such a real alternative look like in the ideal? It would turn South Africa into a society in which the economic paradigm which has governed social relations over a very long time, that paradigm is turned upside down. In the sense that the economy is finally put at the service of vital needs. The vital needs of, if not everyone, at least of the majority of South Africans. In particular, black South Africans. It would be an economy, an economic paradigm that would be premised on a fair access for all to the basic means of existence, in line with the Freedom Charter. Food, jobs, education, health, etc., etc. All those things without which life is unbearable. So we have to unload the burden from the back of those who, for too long, have been carrying it, and share the burden. And as we share the burden, we lift the burden from some of the backs. We have to make sure that we share the assets. And God knows there are so many of them in South Africa. I don't only refer to the wealth underneath the earth, the minerals, but also the wealth that the people themselves constitute. So it seems to me that that is the kind of real deep transformation we have to do. And to remain a little bit on the economic side, it is possible to set in motion in South Africa an economic model which provides jobs to those who need it the most. And such an economic model should be radically ecological. And there is not much reflection in South Africa right now as to what an economic model predicated on the ecological could look like. Finally, it would be a model which would aim at turning the democratic model, which is there, which is mostly electoral, which is mostly procedural, into substantive democracy. And this requires massive intellectual investment and the creation of spaces of debate and experimentation at local level, the investment of local territories, etc. And finally, South Africa will have to resolve the conundrum of its name. Its name is South Africa. What is the meaning of Africa in South? How do we make sure that, although we won't be the solution to the entire misery of the continent, how will we make sure that no African feels like a foreigner, neither in South Africa nor anywhere else in the continent? It seems to me that, look, if we are able to muster the forces for such a renewal, then there will be hope for South Africa. For the time being, okay, politicians are busy looking into what forms of coalitions they want to put in place. Is it a government of national unity? But the deep thinking and the deep exigencies, which some of which I have just listed, I'm not sure that they are on the agenda.
Thank you very much for that. I think we open the floor now for questions, comments. Please be brief. Yes, I have noted too. So you first. Sorry for pointing, but I mean, yes.
I'm very happy that you won the Holberg Prize. Congratulations. Thank you for being here and for giving this meandering and very interesting talk. Something stopped me in your talk. You started with Fanon, and I'm thinking of Fanon, who already told us that in wars of liberation, once you win the war, this process of expiation that you're talking about would not really happen because we live in capital, and that the project of liberation is beyond the nation state as we know it today. And this is why I was thinking, like, when you were saying that in 1948, South Africa, you know where I'm going with this, as South Africa became the only racial state, I can think at least of two, but I'll name only Palestine right now, which also went through its Nakba in 1948. So how do you then read Fanon's observation and your suggestion on expiation when you've limited yourself to an idea of South Africa through where, what do you call it? I mean, it's a very interesting word, metanoia. They go through a metanoia, but is there any other solution under the conditions through which we live?
Would you like to respond to that before we take another question?
Because I don't have a pen or a piece of paper, so I might forget.
Okay.
I might forget what the question is. Okay, fantastic.
Should we take another question? Why you?
Yes, maybe, yeah.
Please.
Thank you. Is it? Yeah. Yes, I think what you said earlier on was very interesting when you're talking about the politics of South Africa post 94, that it's about eradicating the enemy. And I think this is something that has been played a lot during those elections that's been happening. My question to you is, from the view of the results of the elections, where the governing party, the ANC, has really dropped below the 50%, where it cannot form its own government and having to form coalitions. So one can see that as a form of maturity in the democratization of South Africa. However, at the same time, the numbers show that there's been many people who have been registered to vote and yet did not go to the polls. So how is that then viewed to be a positive way or maturing democracy in terms of power sharing, and yet the voices of the people are not coming forth?
Thank you very much. Achille.
Yeah, okay, two very serious questions. Okay, what I find interesting in the 1994 experiment, which is of universal significance, because I mean in South Africa we really don't think that we we are producers of the universal, and yet we are. And in fact, what happened in 1994, I don't even talk about what happened early on, pertains indeed to those attempts at producing the universal, something which is meaningful not only for us, but for the world at large. Part of what happened in 1994 was the choice. And I really use the term the choice. The deliberate choice, following mature reflection by an important part of the South African elite, supported in that sense by social movements, to decide to go a different route. And not to go the route of eradicating the enemy, or not talking to the enemy. It was the refusal to go that route which gives to the South African experiment the philosophical weight. Unfortunately, intellectuals, we have not been able to elicit and to translate into culture, or a political culture. We haven't been able to do that. And I believe that in the world as it is unfolding, when you look around, of course, Ukraine is not that far from here. I don't even want to mention Gaza, because Gaza is so glaringly obvious that we don't even need to mention it. I know you disagree, but you can mention it, of course, if you want. I believe that is not even necessary, because it's so scandalous that any attempt at making us believe that it doesn't exist, any attempt at making us believe that we don't see, that what we are seeing is not true, all of that is doomed to failure. And it is evidence to an abyssal moral failure at the very heart of our contemporary civilization. That's what I believe. You look to Sudan, you look to Mali, Burkina Faso, Somali, just to remain in our own continent. Because most of the times, our tragedies, they are given second, they are second-class tragedies. So let's remain within our own continent. But as we know, they are, as Mandela himself said, we can't look at them separately. There cannot be an apartheid of tragedies because they communicate between themselves. Just like there cannot be an apartheid of memory, that memories cannot be separated. In any case, some memories, they speak to each other, which doesn't mean that one is on top of the other. We have to bring back the debate at that level. So it seems to me that that's what we try to do in South Africa. And it speaks to our world today. And that the idea of reconciliation, as opposed to expiation, and as opposed to vengeance, is much more demanding than we believe. And it's the failure d'aller au bout de, to draw the consequences of the term and the concept. It is that which explains why we don't know where we are. We on tâtonne. We are trying this, that, doesn't work. Meanwhile, who pays the price? So I would like to be optimistic and believe that the current results somewhat show the maturation of the electorate. But who is paying the price of the experimentation, of this long process of maturation? I think we have to ask that question. Could we have done it better, swifter? I have lots of friends in the ANC. I believe that we should have dismissed them 10 years ago. And that by taking 10 more years before giving them 40%, many people have paid a very serious price for that. So look, we are here in a free space, so I can think in that way.
Recorded and live streamed, yes.
Yes. I can think it that way. I'm responsible for nothing. But I really believe that we should have encouraged them to make way 10 years ago. Now, of course, the power sharing thing is really interesting. It is very interesting because what you see now is that many different forces are emerging in South Africa. Some of them are not very appealing, I have to say. And what you see the ANC doing, and one has to commend them for that, it's taking the side of the Constitution and rising at the level of the obligations, which are what? Which are that, you know what, it might be time now to come together and try to sort these out. So one can see the ingredients of the kind of grandeur of the 1990s, 1994, bits and pieces here and there, a defense of the liberal constitution the country gave to itself, and hope that somewhat, maybe, something might come out of that. The other question on metanoia, you see, what I was trying to do, I think that there's scope in the kind of world we live in now for a kind of thinking which is projective, which takes into account the tragedy of the present and its impasse, and yet which, building precisely on that slippery foundation, is able to open the way for something different, something yet to come, something that may never even come in our lifetime, but something which is always ahead of us, which calls for a different dispensation. And I think that some of the struggles many people are involved in right now, when everything seems to have been destroyed, when there's no living space any longer, dead are not really buried, or if they are buried under rubber. Dust is emerging from all sides. It's all foggy. We need, in such moments, a portion of our capacity to think which is devoted to that which is ahead of us and has to come. Will come for sure, but we can't still say when and in what form. So that element might not be really putting pressure on actual events on the ground, but I believe that without that capacity for futurity, politics will basically be reduced to a fight to death between visceral enemies. And that prospect is absolutely nihilistic, to say the least.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes left, and there are like 4 people who want to pose questions. This doesn't really add up, but I think I will take 2 questions, the 2 I have on my list. The man in, sorry for pointing again. Okay, there was, okay, you. And sorry again for pointing. So you first. Quick question.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. I was so eager to come because I felt you had a vision and some guidance to give to a West that is polarized, militarized, has lost its humanism. So is it the Ubuntu thinking, the deep humanism that came out of Mandela, and the show that South Africa has done, that this anti-apartheid ethos is still alive because they confront the state of Israel that needs confrontation now. So thank you for sharing, and could you go a little deeper as to the what UNESCO would call the culture of peace that might be the way forward? Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please.
I never experienced apartheid. My father left it. I was born here, but I grew up imagining it. And what I'm seeing in the world today feels like apartheid, feels like how I imagined it would be living in it. You said that the exceptionalism of apartheid was the legislation, putting it in writing, and I feel that is what we're doing right now. We're like putting it in the open. Some people are more worth than others. This is the rules for those people, and this is the rules for those people. Do you feel that this is the way that the world is turning to apartheid, like I feel that it is? And if so, how the fuck do we fight it? Because I feel that we are fighting it like the PAC and the ANC was doing back in the 30s, 20s, 40s. We're doing all the actionism, we're writing all the books. It didn't work back then, it won't work now. What are we going to do?
Thank you. 2 easy questions for you, in 1 minute. No, let's say 5, and then.
Look, I mean, I wish I had, I could really answer those questions. Yes, I know. But let me, I mean, I know what you are referring to. Of course, and the ANC was created, and see, it's the oldest liberation movement in the continent. That's true. And from the moment it was created in 1912s onwards, yes, it's true. It operated the way you describe it. It pleaded. It petitioned. It did everything almost peacefully. Until, of course, the moment when young people came in and decided that it was enough. And that now things had to change. And they had to change, if necessary, through violence. And that's when things really began to heat up. Because now the paradigm had changed, and the field was now in the, everything was now, the political was firmly written in the register of a fight to death between enemies who needed to be identified, re-identified, reconfigured, and one needed to go after them in a fight that was unequal. And it's always like that. You see, there are moments when you think, goodness me, if only there was some equality in the possession of weapons. If only it were possible that to the Kalashnikov, the opposition is not a stone. The fight between a stone and a Kalashnikov, but a fight between two forms of weapons. But it's never like that. There's always one who is surarmé. I'm sorry, words come easily in French. Surarmé in English, I can't remember what it is. But overarmed or
Overarmed,
something
yes.
like that. Mm-hmm. There's always one who comes, I mean, with a capacity to, as I was suggesting, turn everything into dust. Usually from high altitude, bombing. One who is more capable than the other of turning living environments into toxic environments is never equal. So, some choices have to be made. Let's put aside the more moral dimensions. Who will pay the price? How is it that the cost will be equally shared? Why is it that, how do we make sure that the same do not keep paying the price? The redistribution of the consequences. Let's just remain at the level of efficacy. So there are a lot of conundrums which we cannot just dismiss. If we want to prosecute a just fight, Because when the fight is just, it is invincible. Invincibility depends de la justesse du combat. So this question of a just fight, I'm not talking about legitimate defense and all of that, or the right to self-defense. I'm talking about a just fight. In our experience, historical experience of black people on earth, we were never overarmed. But the fight was just. And the best instances of victory, of invincibility, came from that. So it seems to me that to get out of the nihilist circle our world seems to be entering into, we will have somewhat to reactivate those resources which helped us to determine what is just and what is not. What is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Because, as I speak, major forces are conspiring to make us lose sight of what is just and what is not. To be indifferent to racial violence, to wars of extermination, not name them, to accoutumance à la destruction. It becomes commonsensical to go and destroy and demolish. It's fine. Or if it's not fine, I don't look. Or if I see, I pretend I haven't seen. So we have to reawaken those critical faculties, which are also moral faculties, because the two go together. That's what I think. But look, it's a free society. I mean, everybody can make the choice that fits you the most. That's, in any case, my own statement of faith, and I think I'll stop it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.